children are the most creative of all of us, right? They're the least inhibited. They're the least conditioned by kind of the world around us. And so that sense of childlike wonder is ultimately the root of creativity and the root of invention. It's very important to try to keep it going as much as possible to figure out solutions to our problem, appreciate the world as it is. Innovation, it's almost where creativity meets practicality. You need the creative process because without creativity, you can't really conceptualize new things. And then you need the kind of practical, skills-based mindset to turn an idea into a practice, into a thing, into something that somebody else might be able to use. And then you need the people skills to figure out. I get a lot of good ideas when I've turned off music and sound and podcasts, ironically, when I'm not listening to anything and I'm walking around or taking a shower or whatever. Like in those moments where my mind is kind of floating between different ideas, that's where I tend to have actual ideas. I feel like distraction is the enemy of wonder to some extent, because when you're distracted, you can't wonder.
I love it. He's still moving his head. I'm just like looking at. Does he have a name?
This one's costume is clearly Harry Potter, but the overall robot is, we call them LBs. They're like little bots. They're just pan tilt heads and they're pretty fun. It's an example of a project that you might make with a hummingbird kit. And a hummingbird kit is a kit of parts, servos, LEDs, sensors, a controller, and the kids combine that with arts and crafts materials. And that is kind of came out of that creative robotics and arts and crafts and robotics research strand. And again, I mean, at this point, it's 4 hardware generations away from what we were using in 2009. The core mission of, catalyzing joyful, deep learning experiences, that hasn't changed. That's still the same. For example, here's a Finch robot, and this is sort of, that research strand around developing a robot for computer science education. This is the end result of that, or at least the current result of that. This is 3 or 4 hardware generations removed from what we were developing back in 2008, 2009. But it's just a little robot that can be programmed to avoid obstacles, follow lines, light up. So I don't know how visible that'll be, but you might see some light.
Yeah, I see light, green light. Yeah, and there's like letters on the board.
A little emoji, a little grid of LEDs. And so this is really what this is for allowing kids to kind of see their code in action, see it in the physical world, because that's what robotics does. It provides a conduit for computer code for things that people create to push into the real world and also to get sensor information from the real world. It's not like there's a specific set of, these are the 3 robots that you build with this kit. It's anything that you can imagine that you can put together.
So we've talked about the founding stories, how everything got started in Tom's lab he's in Carnegie Mellon University, and his first few bird theme based robotics, and then that turns into the BirdBrain, and how we focus on birds are one of the smallest mammals. They're so small, however they're mighty because they have everything that they need to function, just like how we have our creativity, and then we package our mighty creativity into a tangible handhold robotics that you can bring home or put on your desk and be with you as you go about your day. And we also talk about the importance of inclusion, diversity, and collaboration. And Tom has this vision and dream of not only popularize or not only bringing robotics into after school program, but also make robotics as part of the cross-disciplinary learning practices for future kids and even adults too. And we also explore the magic of childlike wonder, ways that we can potentially activate that, and usually in the space of an empty space, a white space, a focused space, where we get to observe the nature, or where we get to stay within ourselves undistracted. Welcome to MAGICademy podcast. Today with us is Tom, the founder and CEO of BirdBrain, a National Science Foundation funded company that focuses on bringing in creativity, innovation, and inclusivity with technologies and tool making and design. And it's actually a spin-off from Tom's PhD research over 2 decades ago. So it's a long, long journey. Welcome to our podcast, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah. So we go all the way back. I was actually born in Belgium. I grew up there until I was 8 years old and then moved all the way to Cupertino, California. And in fact, my elementary school was right next to Apple's world headquarters at the time. And then when I was 18, I was already interested in robotics. And so I had the opportunity to go to Carnegie Mellon University, which is basically the world's best place to do robotics. And that's here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I've been here ever since. So I have been to quite a few places and sort of have carried parts of each of those places with me. So, yeah.
I love that. From the intuitive design, the artsy, the sciencey. So it's like an integration of multiple dimensions and perspectives and disciplines. That's beautiful. Why bird brain? What's unique about the brain of a bird?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, the first thing I worked on at the Create Lab was called a canary. Oh, it didn't become a product, but it was an air quality sensor. And then the next thing, we needed a name for the programmable robots. So I said, well, let's go with bird names, cute small bird names, and let's go with Finch, and that'll give us sort of a design and like an aesthetic design direction also. And then, then we thought, okay, well, the next thing we'll call Hummingbird. And then only then did I need to find a name for the company, but I already had a couple of bird product names. So I like, okay, how about BirdBrain? It's a little self-deprecating, but it's, it's memorable. So it should be good.
Yeah, and I like it. Like birds are small but mighty. Like a small bird has everything, just like how we package our imagination and joy and creativity into any sort of robots that you can build. It's small, but it's mighty. It's more than just a robot. Love that.
And they, they're cute and friendly.
I bet adults play this too. Do people use this as like a team building,
That's a good
creativity,
question.
leadership development?
We've seen a little bit of that, but mostly we see people using these in classrooms. Now, the Finch does get used at some colleges at like the freshman level for computer science education. And we've seen both of them used in pre-service programs. So programs where they're teaching pre-service teachers, so people studying to be teachers, how to be creative almost, like how to do these kinds of projects in the classroom. So that's really exciting when that kind of program is using one of our products, because they're teaching kind of the next generation of teachers.
Yeah, and I can definitely see a possibility of like a team building in the workplace, where when we talk about creativity, so how do we practice creativity? We can do painting, yeah, but hey, we can build a robotics. It's like, why not?
Yeah.
So definitely a possible. That's great.
One of the most rewarding things is like when you do a professional development session, so a workshop, and you allow the teachers to bring their children. Because if they've got kids who are 8 to 15 years old, it's appropriate. And then they can work together, and then seeing like the parents working with the kids. And in those cases, those teachers often have no background in robotics, no background in coding. It can be a little bit scary at first, a little bit intimidating. And then seeing like that transform over a half day is really rewarding.
So only half day, it will take someone with no computing or programming background to build a functional robot in half
Yeah,
day.
half day seems about right.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
for their first one.
That makes me want to try something.
Yeah.
In our initial conversation, we were talking about this future culture of creativity, inclusion, diversity, collaboration, deep joy. And you kind of envision a world where these qualities are common and everybody is able to connect with their deep joy. Everybody, even though previously they may think they have nothing to do with creativity, they're able to see their inner creativity. They're able to own up to that and bring that into lives through robotics and AI. So can you share with us a little bit more about why this vision, why this mission, and why robotics?
Yeah, I mean, robotics is just a tool, right? So it is not something like where my mission is necessarily to make a whole generation of future roboticists. That's not really the point. It's really that robotics is a good tool for this kind of thing because it's naturally interdisciplinary. It naturally kind of involves teamwork. It involves building and creating and coding, which these are skills that, society definitely values. So you can make the kind of workforce argument, although it's not an argument it's not my favorite argument, I guess. My favorite argument is more that I believe that, students need to have space in classrooms to be creative, to see that learning isn't something that is siloed. Like, most of school, the message you get is you learn math and then you learn English and then you learn science and then you learn social studies. And these are the things that are important. And it's just this, and this, and this is the curriculum. But that's not really how it works in the real world. And when you give students like a robotics project where they may have to pull information from science class and maybe from English class to present it or to write about it, and maybe from, math class to figure out something about ratios, when you're pulling all of that together, that's sort of the power of these robotics projects, is to pull all of that together and to make it interdisciplinary and to show students that learning is interdisciplinary, and then to also give them that space to be creative, to maybe show a creative side to their teachers that maybe their teachers weren't aware of. So it also allows the teachers to see the students in a different light. Mostly when we work in the real world, we're working with other people. And so it's important to practice that as a skill also. So when I think about like creativity and teamwork, I really do think of those things as skills. And I think it's important to practice those skills in school. And so I think of our tools as primarily just ways to do that, ways to practice those skills, ways to provide space for them, and to do it in a way that's definitely engaging to many students. So that's another part. That's the joyful part, right? Is like.
And I bet you probably ran many kind of workshops, and you probably see how people transition between, oh, I can't, I can't do this, to all the way, hey, look, this is something that I've built. What was the pivoting point? Like, usually how do people change from like in a place of resistance all the way to, wait, I'm able to connect into this joyful space, and I would like to like
Yeah.
collaborate with everyone.
I mean, first of all, like with students, with middle school students or elementary school students, you rarely see that. Usually they're like all in pretty much from the beginning. With teachers who, maybe they don't feel like they're particularly computer literate. They've certainly never done anything robotics. They've maybe never written any code before. We do kind of a scaffolded introduction, right? So we spend an hour, 2 hours teaching them about different components, showing them how to hook things up, showing them how to write some code, to control things, and it's block-based code, so it looks more like puzzle blocks that you're connecting together. And then they all find that I have something that's working, and it's only been a couple hours, and that's not a huge amount of time. What if I spent 10 or 20 hours on this? I'd probably get a lot farther, right? So they start seeing that possibility, and once they see that they can animate things, that's when it gets exciting. And it's what I've noticed in workshops is that art teachers especially will they'll almost be the ones that switch the most. They may be the most, actually I wouldn't say they're the most hesitant, because they're often pretty happy to experiment, but by the end they're creating the most creative projects. And that may be their background in art, but that's just something I've noticed. They're really making some very interesting and beautiful things. So yeah, it just becomes another paintbrush, right? That's fundamentally what I'm trying to do, is that the robotics isn't about the robotics. It's about being a tool for creativity, another outlet or option.
I love that. I love the paintbrush analogy. That's fantastic. What role, and also you were talking about adaptability, innovative thinking, and I think the word kind of innovation has been used and overused in the current world. How do you define innovation according to your background, and how does that differ from creativity? And then how does BirdBrain, or the process of leveraging robotics as a paintbrush, help us to enhance that quality that everybody has in ourselves?
Yeah, I think innovation, it's almost where creativity meets practicality. So for something to be an innovation, it's usually something that is useful to other people. We don't usually call an artwork an innovation, though we might call a new art form an innovation. So innovation seems to be about being almost externally focused. This is something new in the world that other people can use. And so you need the creative process to get there. You need the creative process because without creativity, you can't really conceptualize new things. And then you need the kind of practical, skills-based mindset to turn an idea into a practice, into a thing, into something that somebody else might be able to use. And then you need the people skills maybe to figure out if this thing is truly useful, and if so, how to scale it up, how to bring it to other people, how to maybe persuade other people that it's useful. All of that kind of is on the back end. So in terms of what our products are helping students, they're certainly practicing that creativity piece. But then with a Hummingbird kit, they might be going through an engineering design process. They might be doing some prototyping, and that's that kind of first additional part of execution of creating something that maybe one day could be useful for others. And so one of the things that teachers like to assign for Hummingbird is to create, to ask students to create a prototype of something, some system that might help them or their community or some big problem in the world. And it doesn't have to be functional. It's just a prototype. But it is that first step towards being innovative, I think. Prototyping being is
I love that.
Ideation and then prototyping, I'd say, are those first steps.
So it's design thinking, lean startup style.
Yeah.
That. And what among all the creations that you witnessed, what were some really innovative, interesting, impactful creations that people have created just within a day of workshop?
Yeah, I mean, I would say less about the student creations and more about the teacher, the things teachers have come up with, or the programs they've built to use the Hummingbird kit. So we're definitely focusing on Hummingbird here, but when it comes to when I was a graduate student, and we were first testing these with teachers, and we were asking them, what kinds of lesson plans might you make with this? We were still kind of in that lean startup stage of like trying to figure out how to focus the technology and how to use it. And this teacher created a robot poetry project, and it was really cool, and it was really outside of the box, especially outside of the box of what was being done with robotics at that time. And the idea was, have the students read a 19th century poem and then create sort of an animatronic display that follows the imagery, and also a recording of of them reading the poem is playing at the same time. So it might like they might say a couple of lines in the recording, and then the imagery would flip to show kind of what was being said in the poem. And it was very, very cool. And they implemented that in a middle school classroom, and it worked really well. Like there were 10 projects that were 10 different 19th century poems, and she said like that the students had a much better understanding of those poems than they usually do in that poetry unit, because frankly, seventh graders, eighth graders in poetry, it's not something that a lot of them are really into. And so it gave them a better understanding of the core material. But then they also, had this sort of engineering design and creativity and coding and all of these other skills that they developed as well, or in addition to that. So that's an example of the kinds of things I've seen teachers do. And those are the kinds of like, those are what goes up on my radar, I guess, in terms of just innovative things that people are doing with the kit.
Yeah, because when you're thinking about like learning about poetry, it's just reading and thinking and reflecting. That's kind of the typical way for us to digest and assimilate. But adding robotics to that process, you are bringing that engineering, programming, coding, science, problem solving approach and dimension into a more kind of emotionally embedded or fused moment. Or
Yeah.
that's amazing. And you're bringing hands into that as well.
Yeah.
It's like a very practical. It's like tactile, and
Yeah,
they're
that's
not just
actually, I think,
learning, but they're
another
doing.
important piece of building and making just generally in classrooms is, it changes the dynamic of the classroom in important ways. Students get up, they walk around, they're building, they're standing, they're much more engaged, in part because of that. I think we've underrated the importance of allowing kids to kind of move around. Sixth graders aren't really designed for sitting in place for 7 hours a day. They're just not.
Same with humans.
Yeah, humans in general. Yeah, it's true.
That's great. And how does the role like inclusion and diversity play? Like, have you witnessed some sort of like transition or collaboration that really brings in or enhance or extend the diversities within
Mhm.
the group?
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, the early research for the hummingbird kit, the very first focus groups that we did, the very first workshops were with groups of middle school girls. And so we were thinking about things in kind of I would say, a narrow way, in terms of like, hey, we have this problem in middle school with girls at the end of middle school sometimes showing like less interest in STEM than boys. How do we help solve that? And that was sort of, and I'll say like why that was narrow thinking in a minute, but what we what we took out of that experience is kind of a realization that if you design something to be um, interesting to all, accessible to all, and to provide kind of an alternative path, so to be complementary. So when I say like the Lego robotics competitions, the after school robotics competitions were sort of the only way you could do robotics back then, back in the late 2000s. The problem with that wasn't necessarily that those competitions were boy dominated, though they were. It's that they attracted a certain personality type. You almost had to be into competition and into a view of robotics that was very focused on being, fast and speedy and doing, things faster than your
Better,
opponent and
faster.
better. And that's not the only way to teach engineering design. It's not the only way to teach coding. It's not the only way to be creative. So providing an alternative that is arts and crafts based, yes, it does seem to have the effect that maybe it's more gender balanced or gender neutral, and that it appeals to a broader range, but it appeals more importantly to kind of a different set of personalities more than anything else. It's just providing another entry point, another way in. And so I'm not against robotics competitions. I'm just saying if it's the only thing, then you're only attracting a certain type of person into engineering fields, really.
Yeah, and I think if we make science and robotics more interesting, fun, collaborative, it will definitely have a wider appeal across gender, across ethnicity, across backgrounds, and because it's just fun and we're connecting people through a common human language, which is creativity, collaboration, joy, innovation, and
then the
yeah,
other
that's
piece
beautiful.
is, we really focused on making things work in the classroom, because if it was a project that you have to do as part of your regular classroom experience, then you're involving all students almost by default. Whereas if it's an after school program, I'm not, again, not opposed to after school programs, but my eventual goal, even at a school district where we might be helping with after school programs where our tools are used in after school, the eventual goal, I hope, is to use them eventually with all students in school. That way everybody gets kind of exposure and gets the experience, and then they can decide if they like it or not.
At least they will present with an opportunity. So equalize the playfield. Since you've talked about the future, looking into far way away into the future, what would be the best possible future that you can ever imagine, with all the technology advances like artificial intelligence? Maybe we'll reach AGI at that moment in time, and extended realities and brain machine connections, neural links, and all sorts of technology. What would the future look like?
So
The
that's a
better
great,
version.
yeah, it's a good question, right? Where do we want to end up? I have
Hmm.
this like, I forget the name of the philosopher who said this, but basically, the idea is that utopia um, is a journey, not a destination, right? That people in the Middle Ages would see our world as utopia because everybody in the U.S., many people are well fed, most people are housed from like the standards of a 14th century serf. Like we are, most people have good medical care. Not saying that all of the problems are solved, but by their standards, we would be in utopia. And so when I think about what does a utopia look like in the future, it is just continued improvement, mostly through technology, but in a way that is human focused, that is human and maybe life focused, right? So we're improving our planet. Maybe it isn't the same as the planet that we started with. Maybe we can make it better than what we started with, right? So maybe it
Mm.
becomes more of a garden, but we finally figure out how to maximize the amount of life on Earth in a way that where all life is flourishing, where people are flourishing. I think that's the most important thing, is figuring out how people can be. I don't want to use the word happy exactly, um, because happiness to me feels somewhat transitory. but where we can provide people with meaningful lives, where everybody feels that their life is meaningful, is worthwhile, and where the rest of society also places worth on every life. So technology will have a role in that. It has to, because the problems that we have, poverty, climate change, even to some extent are human created problems like war. I think if you have technological solutions, you can improve over time all of those aspects. If you figure out a new power source that makes it so that, not only can we have renewable energy, but we could have it very cheaply, very easily. If we have, 10 times as much electricity generation suddenly at the same cost, we can do things like, maybe we can do things to reverse global warming, to put it into reverse, right? Like we could capture carbon, even though it seems expensive to us now. Maybe in the future, it's something that we figured out how to do cheaply. So as long as we're making progress towards those goals, I think that's, like I said, it's a journey, but it's a journey where hopefully more people are flourishing.
What role do you think childlike wonder play in that future
So
utopia as a journey space?
yeah, I mean, I think wonder is very important because it's a way for you to, there's two aspects of it. One is just having kind of awe at the beauty of the world, right? Seeing like that kind of wonder where you just see a beautiful sunset and you're just
A
amazed.
beautiful bird.
Yeah, yeah. Or just like, oh yeah, how did something like that evolve? That's so
Mm,
cool, and like a hummingbird, an actual hummingbird.
mm.
And then the other piece is wonder. I wonder how to do this, or I wonder if the world could be different in this way. And that comes back to that creativity. And, when children are the most creative of all of us, right? They're the least inhibited. They're the least conditioned by kind of the world around us. And so that sense of childlike wonder is ultimately the root of creativity and the root of invention. And so it's very important to maintain it, I guess, to try to keep it going as much as possible to, to be able to figure out solutions to our problems, and also just to be able for us to appreciate the world as it is. So it's kind of both sides.
Can I know it's like natural for kids. Can adults develop or awaken or reactivate their childlike sense of wonder? Is that possible? Have you seen people activate that during the process of building Fitch?
I think so. Yeah, I think it comes in a few different places, right? So when it comes to that sense of awe at the world, I feel like one way to reactivate that is to go out in nature and to do so in a way that's undistracted, and to try to observe. Just observe things around you as much as you can. I tend to do it most effectively on bike rides. And I will not say that I am an expert or a guru at this. I'm not. But I will say in my own personal experience, that's like going somewhere that is just naturally beautiful, or even going somewhere that isn't, but paying attention to little things is a way to reactivate that component. And then on the kind of invention side, it is similar actually in some ways. I get a lot of good ideas when I've turned off a kind of, when I've turned off music and sound and podcasts, ironically, when I'm not listening to
Yeah.
anything and I'm walking around or taking a shower or whatever, Like in those moments where my mind is kind of floating between different ideas, that's where I tend to have actual ideas, like actual brainstorms. And so again, it comes back to trying to be less distracted, I guess, just overall. I feel like distraction is the enemy of wonder to some extent, because when you're
The
distracted, you can't wonder.
the ability to focus and even create kind of like a white space, not just visually, but like psychologically and attentionally. It's nice.
Yeah.
All right, great conversation. Before we move to the magic portion of our conversation, I wanted to give a brief recap for our audience. So we've talked about the founding stories, how everything got started in Tom's lab he's in Carnegie Mellon University, and his first few bird theme based robotics, and then that turns into the bird brand, and how we focus on birds are the one of the smallest mammals. They're so small, however they're mighty because they have everything that they need to function, just like how we have our creativity, and then we package our mighty creativity into a tangible handhold robotics that you can bring home or put on your desk and be with you as you go about your day. And we also talk about the importance of inclusion, diversity, and collaboration. And Tom has this vision and dream of not only popularize or not only bringing robotics into after school program, but also make robotics as part of the cross-disciplinary learning practices for future kids and even adults too. And we also explore the magic of childlike wonder, ways that we can potentially activate that, and usually in the space of an empty space, a white space, a focused space, where we get to observe the nature, or where we get to stay within ourselves, undistracted. Beautiful. And so, Tom, what did you enjoy creating so much when you were maybe 11, and then time just disappeared for you?
When I
Where
was
was your
11,
magic zone?
when I was that young,
Mm.
uh, I mean, I was very into building with Legos. I would build the kits, but then I would take them apart and just kind of build whatever. And that was definitely my quiet, like my parents would say, like they could leave me alone for hours and I'd just come out like at dinner or something. And yeah, so definitely, I mean, it is very cliche, engineer who liked Legos. Yes, I understand. But it's truthful. It's where I was when I was.
Were there any particular challenges you have to overcome to that shape who you are? Maybe there are many, but one in particular.
Yeah, I mean, when you're starting a business, there's lots of challenges. You know, I think fundamentally, yeah, there have been many challenges, but the way that I deal with them is it's sort of related to a concept from computational thinking, which is like decomposition. Turn your big problem into smaller problems. And so, instead of getting, I think the biggest challenge in some ways in starting a business or any large project is that it looks so big and you can get overwhelmed. You can just say, "Oh my God, I can't do all of that." And if you break it down and say, "Okay, but what do I have to do today? What do I have to do this week? What do I have to do this month?" Then it becomes manageable. And so that's sort of the biggest challenge in my view, and also the way to overcome it. And it's also the same process applies. We had a big challenge in 2020 when schools shut down, right? We sell to schools, and so same thing. What do you do? You know, it's sort of like, how do you save the company? Big overwhelming problem. Okay, but what do we need to do this week, next week, this month in order to achieve our goals, I guess.
I appreciate how you speak in such a calming voice in terms of problem solving and saving the company, and scaffold the big problems into tangible Lego pieces.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Beautiful. What do you think overall is your magic?
Magic. That's a good question. That I'm definitely an engineer, in that I like to develop things, but I'm an engineer that is focused on making things that are useful and trying as best as I can to listen to people so that the things that I make are useful. They're not just something that I think is cool. And so, anytime that we're developing something, I'm trying to make sure that it is going to be useful, that I'm listening to people, that I'm improving it based on their feedback. Um, and I think so. I think in some ways it's kind of this combination of being, having the sort of technical skills to see where the technology could be, but then bringing that to people and saying, is this useful? Could we use this? What if we changed it? What do you think? Like, how would you change it? So kind of that combination of um, technical skills and maybe some creativity with listening.
I see. So it's like deep empathy, being able to hear, to turn your creativity into innovation
Yeah,
through empathetic listening.
yeah, yeah.
Beautiful. It's such a great conversation, Tom, and I hope our audiences are having a great time after this podcast, probably, and find a white space moment for them as well, to tap into their creativity. And for our folks in the community who are curious and want to learn more about Tom and BirdBrain, and maybe try to build a robot for you and your team, your class, definitely we encourage you to get connected and build more um, wonderful stories within this community and beyond. And
Well,
thank you,
thank
Tom,
you.
very much.
Thank you so much.